a second to introduce our presenter today. Our presenter is Noah Barnett from CauseVox, and he'll be talking about peer-to-peer fundraising and how to tap into your online community to amplify your donations. So thank you all for joining us. A few things: we will be sending out a recording at the end of the session. Once that's all up and running, it will be live at the link that's in the chat session. If you scroll all the way up to the top, it's included there. I'll also be emailing that out to you all, so feel free to pass that along to anyone who you think this organization or this information would be helpful to. And if you have questions during the event, feel free to click on the Q&A section if it's a specific question. But if you want to just chat in the chat section, we'll be monitoring that as well. This is scheduled to go about 45 minutes long. At the end of that, we'll be doing a Q&A session. A lot of you guys had really great questions that you put when you registered, and we want to make sure we answer as many of those as we can. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to pass it along to you, Noah.
Hey, Sarah, thanks so much to you and to Elevation for hosting us today. Like Sarah said, we're going to be talking all about peer-to-peer fundraising, and many of you already shared kind of your experience. And I love the varied kind of experiences that today's participants have. Everything from, yeah, we're doing it, to, yeah, we tried it with limited results, to nope. And so today's presentation is really designed to help kind of you regardless of what stage you're at. And so I'm excited to go ahead and dig in. But before we dive into today's content, I want to start out by sharing 3 quick stories. So this is Corinne, and her son Patrick was diagnosed with autism in 2008 at the age of 18 months. Things were pretty tough for Patrick, Corinne, and their family. Then in 2012, she found encouragement in a community group that provided support and education. And this was huge for Corinne and really helped Corinne support Patrick well. And last year, as he was on the verge of turning 10, Corinne wanted to do more. She appreciated the work that this organization had done, and she wanted to step it up and be a part of it. And today she's actually sharing her story, Patrick's story, as a way to encourage others and raised funding to expand the hope-bringing programs that Corinne discovered herself back in 2012. And meet Chris and his son, Will. In 2017, they traveled together to Zambia as a way to really connect further through a shared passion. I have 3 sons. I can totally relate to this. However, this wasn't simply a bonding trip. Chris and Will together were able to inspire friends and family and colleagues to actually offer new opportunities for 263 people in rural communities in Zambia. And David, he's an advocate for rights for every single LGBTQ person and a board member of GLAAD, which is an advocacy group, and was able to act on purpose and leverage his network to inspire 24 other people to get behind this cause too. So together, Corinne, Chris, and Will, and David each tap their passion, experiences, and connections to really make a significant impact on important causes in you and I's world today. It's truly incredible, but how did that actually happen? And it really happened because the do-gooders in the trenches at these 3 nonprofits understood that today's supporters want to be a part of something, not merely give to it. And they've implemented a framework to really successfully embed this into their messaging and fundraising. And I say all this to kind of build a foundation for some of the learnings that we're going to be sharing later in today's presentation. Because what we're seeing is that today we're actually living in what we call at CauseVox the connected economy. And so people like Corinne and Chris and Will and David are interconnected with so many more people and have access to more information because now it's ubiquitous, which has really resulted in a shift from the power of organizations to individuals. We've also seen, because of this, a decreasing trust in what organizations say about them and an increased trust in what people say about an organization. And so what someone says about your nonprofit is actually more important than what you say or you do in today's connected economy. We're also seeing a huge rapid adoption of mobile, which means people like Corinne and Chris and Will and David can reach out to friends, family, their community, their network, and actually be an advocate for the causes they deeply care about. But it's because these organizations understand these shifts and have really equipped their supporters through peer-to-peer fundraising to be able to actually go out and do this. And then last but not least, technology has and continues to transform and connect all aspects of our lives. And so I work at a technology platform that really equips nonprofits to equip their supporters to actually go out and raise money. People like Corinne, Chris and Will, and David. And I'm going to keep coming back to their stories because I think it's important, especially for those that have not explored how peer-to-peer can be helpful for your organization, to use these stories as you talk about peer-to-peer, where there's individuals that have a network and have a commitment to wanting to be an advocate for your organization. And today's connected economy really empowers them to do that extremely well. And so this is kind of the foundation of what we've been seeing, is that in today's connected economy, the true value of your supporters, so how we typically kind of value our donors or our advocates or our members, or however you kind of define it in your organization, was historically based on the dollar value that they could, or that they have, and or they could give to your organization. So we really focused heavily on this idea of how much money can each of these donors give. But what we're seeing is that today people want to be a part of something, not merely give to it. And that really unlocks two other value components that many nonprofits, and according to the research we did prior to this on those that gave some feedback, over 50% of the people that registered, so almost 300 people registered, 150 or more said, hey, we don't do this. And that could be because you're at a small organization, or you don't see the value, or there's really not buy-in from the board, or maybe you've tried it and it didn't really work, or you didn't really have a framework. But what we're seeing is that those organizations that are tapping into peer-to-peer today are really seeing tremendous growth. And so what I'm hoping to uncover, and what we try to do in our research that we're going to be sharing with you today, is kind of build a foundation that whether you've done peer-to-peer, you're going to do peer-to-peer, or you haven't done peer-to-peer, gives you a glimpse into how these three organizations, World Bicycle Relief, GLAAD, TACA, and thousands of others, have actually integrated this into their organization's efforts. And so one thing that we've seen is that, and this is a quote from our CEO and co-founder at CauseVox, is that most fundraising tools and tactics you're using today were designed to attract donors that no longer exist. And like I mentioned, supporters are hyper-connected. They live inside personal feeds, and they discover and support causes recommended by their friends and desire to be a part of the change, not merely give to it. And I would push a challenge to you that if you look at your fundraising strategy today, so if you kind of close your eyes for a minute, ignore what's on the screen, but just think about, are we as an organization actually inviting people to be a part of the work that we're doing, or just merely give to it? I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. So, be honest, like, how are you approaching this today? Are you inviting people to be a part of the change, or just merely give to it? You can just share your thoughts in the chat pane. I'd love to kind of get a pulse on that, because what we find is that organizations are not necessarily navigating this shift as well as they need to, which is kind of the basis of what our research was today. So if you're brave and you want to drop that in the Zoom chat, feel free to do that. Are you really inviting your supporters to be a part of the change, or simply give to it? And what we found is that this kind of leaves fundraisers frustrated. So we see retention rates continue to decrease or flatline, acquisition costs of donors or to get new donors continues to rise. And the dreadful reality is that 50,000 nonprofits in the US go out of business every single year because they're not adapting to some of these changes. And so we're really excited that we had the opportunity to look at over 1,000 campaigns raising millions, so that we really could give you this framework. And so if you're sitting there right now, and many of you are being really bold and brave and kind of sharing that, hey, I don't really know how to do this, or I'm not sure how to do this, we're going to provide some really practical insights that you can use to continue to have this conversation in your organization. And this has more than just to do with peer-to-peer fundraising, but really a foundational switch and shift and kind of reframe of how you approach fundraising overall. That's less about just what someone can give to you. It's actually inviting them to be a part of that. And one of the tools to do that well is peer-to-peer fundraising. And so that's what we're going to spend the next 35 minutes really diving into. And I'm going to stop just for a minute because I think Wendy just hit like $1 million question. And so I don't want to skip over it. But Wendy said, what does it mean to be involved? And my question is, what does be involved mean, especially to millennials? Wendy, that's an incredible question. And I think one of the things that you're going to learn today, but also I think other misconceptions about peer-to-peer is that this is like a millennial thing, that these shifts that we're talking about are just millennial things. And what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily true. And I'm going to kind of unpack that a little bit more, Wendy, in the next few sessions. So a little background on me, since we're going to spend the next little while together, so you know actually who's talking with you and kind of having this conversation. My name is Noah Barnett, and these are my 3 boys. The one on the left is most like me, so you can tell and learn a lot about me just by looking at this photo. And his name actually is Noah too, and so it's kind of ironic how that worked. And I also so not only as I'm a family man, I'm a husband, I've previously worked in fundraising at an international relief nonprofit and helped lead marketing and fundraising efforts at a variety of nonprofits. But I also run marketing now at CauseVox. And CauseVox is a leading online fundraising platform that really equips nonprofits with everything you need, the software, the best practices, and the hands-on help to run wildly successful peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns. So what we're going to talk about today, but also a bunch of other things, whether it's your online giving pages, fundraising sites for giving days and crowdfunding efforts, P2P registration, so think walks, runs, bike-a-thons. We really have tried to provide you a suite of tools that are super simple to use, they're designed for you, and they're community driven. So they really tap into some of these shifts and trends that we're going to share today. And it's important to have these tools as a foundation so that you can do things like peer-to-peer fundraising really well, because you have the tools to actually equip others to be advocates. So Wendy, you said, what does it mean to be involved? And I think the challenge we see sometimes is that people want organizations like you or fundraisers like you, Wendy, want to invite people to be involved. They just don't have the tools to do this really, really well. And so what we've done is we've actually worked with over 1,500 growing nonprofits that raise millions using CauseVox. So a broad spectrum of types of nonprofits, everything from large nonprofits to small nonprofits, to try to uncover what the common threads are in their success. And that's what we're going to share today. And so our research involved 2,500 campaigns with 84,565 personal pages. So those are individuals that were actually raising money. So people like Matt, people like Will and Chris, Corinne, and David, those types of individuals. So we had that much research to really look into. And this was across a variety of types of campaigns. So things like events and campaigns like race, walks, and runs, event-driven peer-to-peer, annual funds crowdfunding, to giving days, so those that have done like Giving Tuesday or other virtual events, capital projects, program campaigns, to things like peer-to-peer and DIY. So this might be third-party events or memorial and tributes, challenges, weddings, and even like birthday campaigns. And then some personal campaigns as well, where individuals stepped up and said they wanted to organize and launch campaigns for nonprofits themselves. And so we kind of looked at all of this, and it was across large organizations to small organizations, for-profit entities that actually try to empower people through doing good, so social enterprises, things that do large-scale events across the country where they're empowering thousands of people to actually go out and raise money for them, or even things like small walks and runs where like Bonnie could actually go out and raise $250 for this nonprofit in DC, but she ended up raising $800. And so then also corporate partnerships where we had a nonprofit work with a corporate entity to empower people to invest in helping free women from the sex industry in Thailand. And so we looked at that. We also looked at international campaigns because we had access to that. And we really wanted to boil this from all of these observations, analysis, and interviews, we've discovered that there are clear threads that run through each successful campaign. And they're really bucketed into three big ideas. So if you're taking notes, obviously we're going to share the slides with you, but this is kind of where the note-taking can begin as far as some of the practical insights. So when people said, how do you actually do this? This is a perfect time to pay really close attention, because we're going to tease these out into three buckets. So let's do that. So the first bucket is what we call a posture of inspiration in their fundraising versus a posture of guilt. We're going to unpack all of these, and kind of explain this a little bit more. But organizations that are really successful at driving advocacy through peer-to-peer campaigns are ones that have a message or a focus on inspiring someone to give to a campaign or to support your nonprofit, rather than trying to guilt. And so this is, we'll talk tactically, but this is where people are using, you can make a difference, or you are a part of this, or you're coming together with others to make this happen. Things like using stories and whatnot as well. And we'll dive into this. So the first bucket is inspiration over guilt. The second bucket is you want to activate supporters. So have a posture of understanding that your donors, your supporters actually have a potential, not only just to give you money, but to give of their influence and their time. And your job as a fundraiser to really activate that, not convince them. We get a lot of questions every day because we talk to nonprofits about peer-to-peer, where they're like, how do we convince people to raise money for us? And that's the start of kind of a bad approach to doing peer-to-peer, because it's not about convincing people, it's about releasing them and activating them to do that. And so people like Corinne, or people like Will and Chris and David, didn't need to be convinced to go raise money. They needed to be activated because they had a story, they had a passion, and the organizations that were behind those campaigns just needed to activate them to do that well. And then the last bucket we found was this idea of you want to rally fundraisers. So once you have personal fundraisers, so once you have people raising money for you, like Will and Chris, you don't want to control them, you want to rally them. And this is a topic that we'll unpack a little bit more as we go through the training. But this is key, because I think this is where organizations miss. They understand, okay, we need to be inspirational. We need to activate people to raise money. We need to give them the tools to be able to do that on our behalf. But it stops there. And the organizations that we see that have successful peer-to-peer campaigns or efforts are the ones that focus on rallying their fundraisers after they're activated. Again, you don't have to understand that fully, because we're going to really unpack that. And this led us to actually develop a framework. So after we did all this research, we wanted to give some language and some framework to how do you actually successfully launch peer-to-peer efforts in your organization? How do you invite people to be involved rather than merely give to? So we developed this community-driven fundraising playbook. And if you're interested in this playbook, we have a whole overview on our website. And we have a video, and we have like an hour-long training that really dives into this even further than I'm going to be able to today. And so if you want that training, if you want access to those materials, just simply shoot me an email. It's noah@causevox.com. You can do it now, or you can do it in a minute. You can shoot me an email, and I'll actually send you the link personally for that content, where we really unpack this playbook, because the playbook was the result after the research. And I'm going to kind of give you a glimpse of that over the next 20 minutes. So shoot me an email if you want access to that training, and I'll gladly give it to you for free, so you can really have that as a backbone to how you focus on really embedding this idea of peer-to-peer and inviting people to be a part of, not merely give to, into your organization. So let's keep going. So the first bucket I talked about was this idea of inspiration over guilt. So what do we mean by this? I love this quote because I think this quote summarizes everything that I'm going to say, but in less words. And so the founder of Save the Children back in 1890 kind of put this quote out there. And really it was like kind of a charge to people like you and I who were fundraisers for nonprofits. And the charge was this: we have to devise a means of making known the facts. So the facts of what your organization does, why your organization matters, who cares if you went out of business tomorrow, who are you actually advocating for or fighting for, who benefits from your services. Those are all facts. But we need to share those facts in such a way as to touch the imagination of the world. The world is not ungenerous, but unimaginative and very busy. And I love this quote because I think it comes back to this idea that our job is not just to share the facts or tell people about what we're doing, but it's to touch the imagination of the world with these facts. Because the world is not ungenerous, but they're unimaginative and very busy. And against all things, when I was a fundraiser, all I did was say and complain, really. I was like, oh, our fundraising efforts aren't working because people just don't care. No one cares about this. And I think that's an invitation for you as a fundraiser, as a team, as a head of an organization, really think differently. Like, how do we explain these facts in such a way that really touches the imagination of our audience, those that we reach out to, those that read our emails or come to our website or attend an event? That's not just us sharing the facts, but actually inspiring people to get involved. And so here are a few tactics that I've used and we've seen used across organizations we analyzed to actually do that really well. And so the first is that to do peer-to-peer well, or to do community-driven fundraising well, you really need to highlight stories, not stats. And the difference here is that stats do not inspire anybody. Stats provide a backbone or kind of a factual underbelly of stories or of work that you might be doing, but they're not going to inspire people to take action. And what's even more important is that when you're looking to inspire people to get involved, inspiration drives something more than just giving. Because I can convince you to give to my cause, or I can come up with a rational reason why you should give me $100 right now. But if I tell you a story, like the one of Corinne or Chris and Will, and share why they are behind something, and not just why they're behind it, but the stories of, a boy named Samuel who is part of a family that is really struggling in Zambia. And through Chris and Will's programming and their efforts, they were able to give Samuel's dad mobility so that he could make his way to places where he could get more work and that he could better provide circumstances for his family. But not only that, that actually unlocked something different. And it was that it gave Samuel the opportunity to dream again of a different future. And that's a powerful thing. Like, I could share facts with you, but this idea of telling stories or highlighting stories is really going to be helpful as you look to do peer-to-peer, because these stories are going to be what drive your peer-to-peer fundraisers to actually go out and fundraise. And they're going to be more successful if you're equipping them with stories to share, not just stats or needs or this is what we do type content when you go out and fundraise. And so one of our customers, World Bicycle Relief, Claire, she's the director of partnerships there. She said, you really want to give your fundraisers a compelling and uplifting story to share with the donors they're reaching out to. So Chris and Will could go out and share about how they were working to help families provide mobility, but that was going to give them the opportunity to come out of poverty and invite their kids and give their kids an opportunity to dream again. So those are the types of things that are really powerful and really motivate people to go out and fundraise on your behalf, is the stories, because ultimately stories are what connect us. Stories are what bring us together. Stories are what we share on a Friday night at happy hour or on Thanksgiving or around a holiday table when we're sharing with friends and family. Stories are also what we share on Instagram. It's called Instagram stories. Like, we want to share stories, and that's how we typically communicate about what we care about, what's important, what's bothering us, what we're against. And so your organization thinking about fundraising in a way that's packaging your work into a story format is going to be extremely helpful as you move into peer-to-peer, because you're going to provide those stories to your peer-to-peer fundraisers to actually use as they go out and raise money on your behalf as well. World Bicycle Relief is a great example of an organization that does this. They use everything from powerful storytelling of one, where they might tell the story of one girl in a community that they're serving, as a catalyst to really drive support and people's fundraising efforts to raise money for this organization. They also use multimedia content, so maybe they share a video, but they also share written word and copy, where they tell stories in a different way so that their fundraisers can actually use that content to share it out as they're going and raising money. And this comes back to kind of a pro tip that we've seen and observed, is that organizations that are really good at peer-to-peer fundraising, they have a story that they've put together, or a series of stories that are really designed to be shared. And so it's not just to consume a story. So it's not an A to B type transaction where, I want to tell you something and then I want you to respond to it, but rather equipping your fundraisers, your donors, your supporters with the ability to actually pass that story on. And so when you're designing your story, you design it in a way that's really simplistic, and that there's 3 or 4 points that your supporters are going to hear that they can then repeat as they're sharing it with others. Because stories are going to be easier for them to share and remember, because that's just how we connect and communicate with our brain, our brain. And it's also going to be easier for them to pass it on and make it easier to pass it on further. And so trying to uncover what your story is in your organization is essential before you even start to do peer-to-peer, because peer-to-peer is going to require you to equip those fundraisers with something to go out and leverage to raise money on your behalf. Because what you do and the facts behind it isn't going to be sufficient if you're looking to grow and be extremely successful, like some of these 2,000 nonprofits that we looked at. The second tactic that I think is crucial and that we've seen is that you want to be cause-centered and not organizational-centered. And I've already talked a little bit on this, so I don't want to spend too much effort on this. I think what's interesting is when we look at kind of donor preferences and donor kind of trends, people are becoming more cause-oriented or cause-centered rather than organizational loyal. And so they're looking for causes that they can get behind and be a part of advocating for. And an organization is more of a conduit for them to be involved in that. So whereas maybe historically there was kind of I give to this organization because they do good work. Whereas today it's more of, I want to get involved in this cause and I'm partnering with this organization and others to be able to work on that cause. And so I think reorienting some of your fundraising to focus less on, this is what our organization does, give to our organization, and more inviting people in to actually be a part of the cause that you're working for. So really the why of what your organization exists for is essential to success. And we've seen that work well with organizations like Volo City Kids Foundation, where they use stories of beneficiaries to really showcase the need and impact opportunity can have, and also invited people to provide hope and opportunities in their own kind of unique way by this So Every Child Can campaign, where they wanted to use their fundraising campaign to invite people to kind of finish the sentence. And it sparked an emotional response and really drove sharing. And so they had a bunch of people come alongside them and help them raise money. And they only raised $15,000 through this effort, but that was a huge difference for them in their organization based on their size, because they were a very small organization. And through the help of CauseVox's platform and also our hands-on help and ultimately this story, they were able to really drive more success than they had with previous campaigns during year ends, because they changed it up, used stories, they invited people to be a part of it, and then go out and share that story with their friends, family, and community. So the third thing that we kind of talk about as far as the inspiration over guilt bucket goes is that you want to showcase your impact, not your organization's work. And so this kind of plays off the previous one, but I think Jay, the founder and CEO of Endure to Cure, kind of put this in a better kind of framing. So he said, you want to share exactly who benefited from each person's fundraising and how. When we can, we even take this to the next level by sharing the story of exactly what child family is going to benefit from the fundraising and what assistance they'll receive before the team member starts fundraising. This makes their fundraising ask even easier. And so really what we're talking about here is maybe not going to the full extent of Jay's comment, because your organization might not operate in that way, where you have a very clear, like, we're going to use this funding to impact these people. Really showcasing to your fundraisers the outcome of what they can be a part of helping fundraise for is essential as you work on peer-to-peer efforts. So we have a few questions. We're going to dive into the next section, but I want to make sure that we address some of these questions. So these are great. So keep sending in questions or chatting in the chat pane. We see all of those coming in. We're going to address some of them at the end, but I think Ruth had an interesting question. She said, what is your definition of success when it comes to fundraising? So Ruth, I would like to maybe you could unpack that a little bit more of what you're trying to dig for. But I think there's really three crucial things when you're looking at fundraising. So I ran growth for a nonprofit, and the three big things on how we measured success was how many new people were we engaging with and inviting to be a part of the work that we were doing. So think about, like, traditionally it would be called donor acquisition. So how are we getting new people into the fold? So that was a success metric. So every time we went out and fundraised, we really wanted to focus on what was our kind of new audience growth goal. Second, we really wanted to focus on retention. And, like I mentioned at the beginning, retention is kind of flatlined on the average. But what's really important is to look at your organization's retention metrics, and you may be doing awesome, but a lot of organizations are struggling with this. And so we always focus on defining success based on retention. And so when we looked at success, even from a peer-to-peer campaign, we used peer-to-peer as a next step to invite supporters further into the organization's efforts and the work that we were doing together with them. And so it was a retention play to say, hey, we want you to get involved with this, because the more we can get people involved, the higher likelihood that they're actually going to be retained year over year. And we saw that in the data, like when we really looked into it. And the third thing we really focused on was how could we maximize the investment that we receive from each supporter. And we weren't ahead of the curve at this point. So we looked at that really just from a money standpoint. But what I've been challenged to do is, as we look at a donor, so if we look at Chris, for example, so Chris and Will, who was a supporter of the World Bicycle Relief Organization, we want to maximize their value. So we want to invite them in, we want to retain them, but we want to continue to grow their investment, both their individual giving and their ability to influence others to give, and know that that over a lifetime is worth a significant amount. And we want to continue to cultivate that. So we always looked at how are we cultivating deeper relationships with our supporters, not just retaining them or getting them to give again this year or convincing them to give again. How could we really drive them to be more engaged with our work? So hopefully that is a helpful understanding of the definition of success, and really see how some of the things that we're sharing are actual tactics and strategies that your organization needs to use across all of your fundraising to really drive those measures of success further. Indeed, yeah, absolutely. Organizations need to define success based on their own individual organizational goals. But I think in general, especially if you're looking to cultivate an individual donor base, which I'd assume many of you are if we're talking about peer-to-peer, those three kind of buckets of measurement typically hold up pretty well. Great question. So the next bucket we're going to really dive into is this idea of activation before or over convince. And so this is getting into the facts that, you're looking to start a peer-to-peer program, or you already have a peer-to-peer program, but maybe it's not performing as well. And so one thing that we see, is that organizations that kind of are able to pilot peer-to-peer as a tactic to reach some of their organizational goals and then drive success over time. Because peer-to-peer isn't just a short-term thing. It's not like I'm sending out this direct mail piece and then I'm going to get results and I can measure the success of that. But rather it's about cultivating a sense of invitation as part of your organization's posture and messaging to your donors, to invite them to be a part of, not merely just give to the outputs or the impact that your organization is trying to have. And so a few tactics that we've seen work really well is this first one, which is start before you start. And so I already kind of teased it out, but one thing that's interesting is that organizations that are successful always pilot a peer-to-peer program with a group of supporters or constituents or kind of a segment population inside their organization that are more likely to give are more likely to help the organization explore how peer-to-peer would work well in that organization, and also give the organization time to learn how they can best support their personal fundraisers and be able to kind of learn how they can help new personal fundraisers that maybe are more wary or less equipped or less loyal as the supporters that you invite initially to be successful. And so this idea of starting before you start is really essential. And so Jake, one of our customers at CauseVox, said, think of the launch of a peer-to-peer campaign the same way you would launch a capital campaign. You wouldn't release a campaign to the public to raise $20 million for your new building with $0 in the coffers and no backers. So why take that approach? with peer-to-peer. And really what he's saying in this quote is that it's important to start small with your peer-to-peer fundraising. And so maybe this is doing a board fundraising campaign like we saw recently with the Nonprofit Technology Conference or Network. They actually did this with their board members. So instead of inviting their entire donor population to come out and do a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign, they really piloted it with their board members. Another organization really focused this another organization really focused on activating their volunteers as an initial participant. And so all of that is kind of a good idea as you consider, how are you going to get started with peer-to-peer? So it's identifying a pilot population or segment of your audience that you really can start small with and learn from as you go up. The next one is a little bit different, but it can seem similar in that it's segment always. Peer-to-peer is not for everyone. And so when you launch a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign, we get a lot of organizations and nonprofit fundraisers that are super excited because they're like, I'm bought in, I'm ready to implement this. We get set up on CauseVox so that we can support this. And then we're just going to blast this out to all of our supporters. And it really kind of misses the point. What we see is that if you think about your audience similar to how you would maybe divide supporters by like major donors or middle donors or kind of like new donors or monthly givers, however you kind of segment on the financial side, it's the same way for when you're segmenting on peer-to-peer or in engagement next steps. And so we always encourage supporters to identify groups that they want to focus on. So maybe this is people that already give on a regular basis to you and you know that they're loyal and they've been giving monthly for over a year and you want to invite them to do something more. Like I mentioned, the other example, maybe it's your volunteers that you want to focus on to really activate them to not only give up their time, but also to give of their influence to really rally others to be a supporter of the organization. Maybe it's your board members, maybe it's donors that already gave this year. And so they gave a big gift in the spring. And so in the summer, you might run a peer-to-peer effort where you invite those supporters to kind of take the next step. Some organizations we've seen, instead of it being like a segment, it's just a next step opportunity when new donors give. So they want to capitalize on the momentum of someone giving to the organization and then immediately inviting them to be a part of advocating for the cause that they just supported. And so that's where they plug in peer-to-peer. And so this really depends on your organization's makeup. But the key thing here is that you really want to segment always. Peer-to-peer is not for everyone. And so you want to find key opportunities or key segments in your audience that you can activate for a peer-to-peer effort. I already shared this example. The community-driven organization, the Nonprofit Technology Network, really challenged and activated their board members to go out and fundraise. Created a friendly competition by showcasing real-time progress, and also provided board members an opportunity to share why NTC, or Nonprofit Technology Conference, which is what they were raising money for, really mattered to them. And so I think the key here is that you're giving if you look at peer-to-peer as less like this is a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign and this is something we have to convince people to get a part of. What I love about this idea is that you're really just presenting an opportunity for supporters to share why they care about your organization and allowing them to share that out with their friends, family, and community. And so for comparison reasons, especially if this is like a newer concept in your organization, is I like to compare it to something we're probably all familiar with, which is like restaurant reviews. So when I go out to eat at a restaurant, I never go to a restaurant anymore without reading reviews on places like Yelp or Urban Spoon, or some other place that basically gives me a patron's opinion of how that restaurant is. Whether they're rated high or they're convenient or not, I really want to know what people's experience was and how they describe that. What is this organization all about? What is this restaurant all about? Is the atmosphere good or bad? Is the service good? Is the food good? What should I order? And so in some ways, peer-to-peer is a similar approach, but for nonprofits, where you can give your supporters really an opportunity to showcase why they care about your organization and help be a part of raising money to advance that cause for good. The next peer-to-peer tactic that we're going to share as far as activation is really choosing the right platform. So obviously I'm biased CauseVox has a peer-to-peer platform that is incredible. I was actually a customer for 5 years prior to joining the team to run marketing. So I've used CauseVox's platform extensively. But regardless of whether you use CauseVox or another peer-to-peer fundraising platform, it's really important to choose the right platform. And Caroline over at Taka, she's the development director there, said it this way: peer-to-peer fundraising software, it's key. If you're working with a product that is limited, you are limited in your results. And one thing that's really interesting by this is that you make a lot of decisions in your nonprofit where you might buy a CRM, or maybe you might buy an accounting software or a volunteer management software, or something where it's really internally facing. And so you and your colleagues are the ones working on it. But something like peer-to-peer fundraising it's one of the few decisions that you're going to make when you're buying technology for your nonprofit, where the technology decision you make is directly going to impact your supporters' experience as well, because they're going to have to use and experience the product that you bring in-house to support your peer-to-peer efforts. And so one of the things that we always point to when we're sharing how people should consider what platform they should choose is a few things. One, you want to make sure it's fully branded for you. So there's a lot of ways people can go out and raise money on behalf of your organization, but it's not branded and kind of owned by your organization. So even things like a Facebook or a GoFundMe or a few other platforms that are out there, they're still running Facebook or GoFundMe campaigns, and then you're just the beneficiary of that campaign. What we see as successful peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns have a platform and tools that are owned by them. So it's branded for them to build a consistent experience for their supporters. It's also the nonprofit, you have visibility and ownership over all the data and the funds. So instead of you waiting for a check from some other organization that you might get in 4 to 6 weeks and not really fully know who that money came from, you want to have visibility over who gave you that money, where it came from, who influenced that money, and all of that. So having a platform that really gives you customization and ensure that's designed for you and gives you visibility is essential. The second thing is ensuring that you have a really seamless experience for your fundraisers, so that regardless of their tech savviness or suave, they really can create a peer-to-peer fundraising page or leave your nonprofit, quote unquote, a review in the simplest way possible. And a lot of platforms, including CauseVox, provide you, the organization, the ability to actually provide templates for your supporters so that individuals like Pranush can actually go through, and instead of him having to come up with something from scratch, you can provide some customized content that he can start with and then add his own flavor and opinion on it so that he can be successful and raise money. And then obviously you want to make sure that it empowers them to spread the word, not just on social media, because peer-to-peer is not just a social media fundraising campaign, but also share it by email and gives them a customized URL that they can actually share out with their friends and family. The next thing you want to keep it personal. And what we mean by that is that organizations that really focus on peer-to-peer want to ensure that when they're asking people to be a part of this, it's coming from a personal thing. So it's not just your organization blasting out, hey everyone, you can do peer-to-peer now, sign up here, but rather inviting them to be a part of it. And so peer-to-peer is a very personalized approach to fundraising. And so what we encourage our customers to do is to send out personal invites, even if it's sent out to a lot of people at once, but writing emails from one person to another, inviting them to be a part of this effort and keeping it really, really personalized. And the Motherhood Collective saw this firsthand, where they invited their 200 volunteers to help fundraise for 30 days around Mother's Day, which is coming up again. And they raised $7,000 in year one and 24 in the next year, and they raised almost 40 the following year. And Jake shared it this way: from helping them to see the impact of their work, they're helping to support, to make them feel supported and encouraged, to equipping them to become an effective fundraiser. Nothing has yielded better results than really assigning these kind of like personal liaisons, so that someone, when you're inviting people to fundraise for you, they have a personal contact that they can actually work with, so that if they have questions or they're just not sure what to do, they know they have someone in the organization that they can reach out to. So the last thing here is rally. And I already said that this is super important. Because we're a little short on time, I'm going to push through this more quickly than I would have hoped, but I'm going to highlight the key things. So once you've activated supporters, so let's say you've implemented a peer-to-peer program, you've gotten a platform like CauseVox, you've launched your campaign, you've decided what segment you're going to reach out to, maybe it's your volunteers or your board member, and people have now started creating pages. This last step, again, is the one that organizations skip the most often. They think their work is done after people sign up to raise money, and then question why their fundraisers weren't successful or why peer-to-peer didn't really work for them. And so I'm going to share a few tactics on what this idea really means. So the first thing here is you want to equip your fundraisers to be successful. And so organizations do this in a lot of different ways. They might host digital trainings for new fundraisers. Others might have kind of a how-to guide that really walks people through how to be a personal fundraiser. Others that are like community-based nonprofits, they'll actually have an event, like a physical event, and invite people to come so that they can share exactly how peer-to-peer fundraising works with their audience and kind of de-risk people signing up. And then organizations that are larger kind of put together something like this, which is a fundraising toolkit, which really just lays out expectations for your fundraisers to know exactly what they're going to get into and the steps they can take to be successful. So they're at point A, how are they going to get to point B? And then ultimately, how are they going to get to point C? And a toolkit like this, which World Bicycle Relief created, makes it really personal to kind of give next steps and answer some of these key questions. Is like, I've signed up for my page, now what? First things first. You really want to make it personal. You want to kick things off with the first donation. Here's a roadmap to say, hey, on your first day, and this is really fancy and designed, but yours doesn't need to be that. You know, they have the resources to be able to do this, but ultimately what it is that you want to make sure that you outline the expectations and give your supporters and fundraisers a roadmap that they can follow to be successful. The second tactic is you want to be a support and encouragement. Jessica from Baycat says, you know, remembering that your peer-to-peer fundraisers have different levels of comfort asking for money, you want to make sure you help them get over the hump. And so one thing they do is they reach out to fundraisers that seem to be struggling, and they are outwardly helpful. And they want to help individuals that are being successful. They want to showcase those successes with other fundraisers. So they might share about how Eric's raised $11,000 and some of the tactics he's done so that people like Lauren can actually raise some more money. And this is something that we see very clearly with someone like a Chris and Will or a Corinne, where they were following in the footsteps of other fundraisers' success, and the organization was able to showcase, you know, hey, you know, this Sean was able to fundraise and here's some tactics they did, and that helped Chris and Will be more successful. Or Megan, who had already raised money and shared her son's story, Taco was able to share Megan's story with Corinne to really help them, or help her really be successful in her campaigns. So this is what we mean by kind of being a support and encouragement. So whether someone's being successful or not, you really want to come alongside them. Jay talks about it in the way that being outwardly helpful without being overwhelming. You want to inform your fundraiser about your cause, your programs, your impact, and so on in a simple, easy to understand way. You also just want to support them in a way that they feel guided and comfortable with everything that's going on. The last thing that we'll share here is that you want to celebrate everything. And so every campaign isn't going to be wildly successful. Every fundraiser isn't going to hit their goal, and every person sharing your campaign isn't always going to get the messaging quite right. But you have to be ready to celebrate everything. And I think this is one of the things about peer-to-peer that's really, really interesting, is that the success of peer-to-peer isn't just whether you as a nonprofit are successful at peer-to-peer fundraising, but heavily depends on how well your supporters are at fundraising. So that's why you want to equip them well, you want to support them, but also that they come back and continuing to do this. So a lot of organizations see initial success when they run their first campaign, but then more people get involved and people are better at it. So they'll come back the next year and they'll continue to raise more and more money year over year, and even invite others to come alongside them and raise money too. And I think that's really the key to success, is that you want to make sure that you have some processes in place to equip your fundraisers, you want to support them, and then you also want to be able to celebrate them. And I'll kind of end on this. You really want to be grateful and delighted. And so your fundraisers are a valuable extension of your brand and your development, so treat them well and not like a fundraising commodity. Prove the difference they are making and show them how grateful you are for their efforts. Happy, delighted fundraisers will promote you to others and or stay involved. And so these are some of the key things. Like we really see that there's 3 buckets that organizations focus on that have successful peer-to-peer programs. These are kind of the foundational pillars that they have set up so that they can launch a successful peer-to-peer campaign. So it's not just about having the right technology or the right tips and tactics or kind of like silver bullet or anything like that. It's really about building these foundational pillars. You want to inspire over guilt. You want to highlight stories, be cause-oriented, and show impact. You want to activate over convince. You want to start before with small, test segment. You want to segment for context so that you're inviting the right people to be fundraisers. You want to choose the right platform to partner with. You want to keep things personal. And then once people are fundraisers, you really want to focus on equipping them to be successful, encouraging and supporting them, be outwardly helpful without being overwhelming. And you want to celebrate everything and be grateful and delighted and show up for them throughout the process. And this is why we kind of developed this framework to really help you launch a successful campaign. So you have the stories in place, you are able to activate supporters and then rally them to build momentum over time. And ultimately, this will help you go out and rock some peer-to-peer fundraising. So thank you guys so much for your time. I know we went a little bit over as far as the content goes, but I wanted to invite Sarah back up for us to kind of dive through some of the Q&A. Sarah?
Hey, Noah. All right. So there was a few questions that I wanted to touch on that were submitted from the initial sign-up form. And so a lot of the questions were answered, so that's awesome. But I want to go through this one, which says, we live in a small community, but have many nonprofits always asking for donations and raffle items. How do we stand up or think outside of the box to get donations in other cities that the benefit does not reach? Our local businesses are being bombarded. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take. It's a little bit beyond the initial peer-to-peer, but I thought that could be information that some small nonprofits might find useful.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one that would require, a whole nother webinar to really dive into this idea of how do you raise money outside of your area of impact. But I think one thing that we've seen that works really well with smaller organizations is really twofold. So doing peer-to-peer fundraising, I think, is key. Because you said the businesses are tapped out, but there's other people in your community that have a higher affinity or likelihood to support your organization's effort because they're a part of the community that you're serving. And I think illuminating that, not saying we serve this community, but providing some stories that people can grab onto and your supporters in the community can share with their friends and family would be really helpful. And that's really the foundation of peer-to-peer. Outside of that, which I only can touch on because we don't have too much time, is really understanding what the kind of key points of affinity that your organization has that you may be able to present to others that care about that work. So this is really common in like grant applications, where even if you're an arts organization serving this specific area, there may be other arts organizations or businesses outside of your community that support those types of initiatives. So for example, we had an arts organization that was looking to kind of upgrade their, they had some building problems and capital issues where they couldn't upgrade the facilities in the right way. And so they went out to try to find businesses that cared about the arts, but also had the capacity to help provide maybe some operational kind of gifts in kind. And they were able to get solar panels donated because this company really believed in the arts and kind of how solar panels. So there's a lot of different tactical things that you can do, but it's really finding what are the key tenets that we do and what are other groups or audiences or populations that also care about that. And that's a exercise that you can do inside your organization, but it's really tough. If you want to reach out to me, whoever asked the question, if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I'd be happy to pick up the conversation on that. But I don't think we have enough time to kind of dive into that further today.
All right, that was a good overview. We have another question here that says, how do you show a story when we're in just the beginning of stages of your nonprofit, when you haven't raised enough money to put something in yet into place?
Yeah, so I think that people that start nonprofits have a reason why they're starting or a audience that they're still trying to help serve. And so story isn't always necessarily like we did this and then X, Y, and Z happened, but it's rather even kind of interpreting a story of if we're successful, if we are able to launch this initiative for the reasons that we think and get the support we need, this is what success looks like. And you're showcasing kind of that like superhero, like we came in, our community was a part of this and we saved the day, but also telling stories that like are the opposite sometimes as well. Whereas like if we don't do something, this is kind of the outcome. Like if we aren't able to step in, if we aren't able to provide the support that we have, this is the outcome, whether that's a current state outcome or something is going to continue to get worse. And so every nonprofit still like has a reason why they're getting in the game. And if you don't know what that is, one thing I always say is if you shut down tomorrow, who would care? And typically that's a great seed point for you to go out and find your stories, because the people that would care, because even organizations that serve animals or the environment, there's usually a people story behind there somewhere. There's some sort of impact on humanity or people, because that's typically what motivates us. You need to uncover those by asking that specific question.
Yeah, I like that a lot, like showing the people who are going to benefit the most and feeding into their stories as well.
Yeah, exactly. Regardless of what the cause is, whether you're a local school that is privately funded or an environmental group, I think there's a people story behind every cause.
Absolutely.
If there isn't, and you have a unique one, email me. I'd be happy to try to unpack that. Noah@CauseVox.com.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So there's one person who submitted that their past attempts at peer-to-peer about a little over 5 years ago were failed at the organizations. How do we now convince our team that new peer-to-peer is worth giving a shot?
Yeah, I think all the data of just like trends out there. So if you look at like the M+R reports on kind of like donor trends, we see that retention's just not great and continues to be flat. We also see competition for donor attention continues to increase. But what we do see is that organizations that are able to connect their supporters in with their organization's mission and cause are more likely to be able to grow sustainably. And that's what we try to highlight some of these examples. And so what I see is that peer-to-peer is a way, again, it's not just a tactic. So I would move away from it just being like, we are doing peer-to-peer, and rather being, this is a way that we can invite people in to be a part of, not merely give to our cause, and then tie it back to a key success metric, which would be like, this is a retention mechanism, because we know if we get supporters involved, they're more likely to give again. And they also feel more connected to our cause, which are some of the reasons why most donors don't give again, is they don't feel connected. So I'd kind of spin it on its head a little bit to kind of highlight some of the stats, the changing dynamics. We live in the connected economy. And so the power of individuals is more relevant than ever. And then ultimately, it's not about just doing peer-to-peer, but rather as a way to invite people to be a part of, not merely give to your organization, which is ultimately going to increase retention and help you acquire new donors in a highly competitive world.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Noah, we really appreciated having you here. And to all the participants still on, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you learned something very valuable. We absolutely loved having you here. And thank you for submitting your comments and questions. We like to keep it a conversation and hear from you guys so that we make sure we're getting as much as, giving you guys as much of the information as you need as possible. Just a reminder, we will be sending out a recording and the slides of this from the webinar to all of you guys in just a few hours. So stay tuned for that. Feel free to share that with anyone you think this would be helpful to. If you want to get your board on board with peer-to-peer fundraising, share that to them as well. Anyone who needs it, yes. So thanks for joining. Noah, any last thoughts?
No, but if anyone wants to continue the conversation about peer-to-peer, feel free to email me. I love conversations, much easier than going to a website. Just shoot me an email, noah@CauseVox.com, and we can pick it up from there. So I'll talk to everyone in the inbox.
All right. Thanks so much. And thanks for all of your guys' feedback. Great to have you on again.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye.